This story isn't about money. It's about what happens when thousands of people quietly decide to show up at the same moment, without being asked, without being pressured, and without expecting anything in return. In less than 2 days, a simple online fundraiser reached over $2 million. Not because of controversy, not because of headlines, but because of a legacy that meant more to people than many realized. And what makes this moment especially powerful is who that support was really for. The fundraiser appeared online on February 11th. There was no dramatic launch, no viral campaign strategy, no aggressive promotion, just a message written by close friends of the family, calm, respectful, and painfully honest. It explained that James Van Der Beek's family was facing a new reality, one shaped by years of medical expenses, uncertainty, and now profound loss. According to the fundraiser's description, the goal wasn't luxury or excess. It was stability. It covering everyday living expenses, paying ongoing bills, and making sure the children could continue their education without disruption. That was it. And yet, within 48 hours, more than $2.2 million had been donated. So what caused such a rapid, collective response? To understand that, you have to look beyond the number and toward the person people felt they already knew. For many fans, James wasn't just an actor they recognized from television. He was someone they grew up with, someone whose work had quietly been part of their lives for decades. But what resonated most in recent years wasn't his career. It was the way he spoke about his family. In interviews, he rarely positioned himself as the center of the story. Instead, he talked about fatherhood, not as an achievement to brag about, but as a transformation. He once described it as a shift away from putting yourself first, toward prioritizing these little tiny humans who suddenly redefine everything you care about. That perspective stayed consistent. Even during periods when he was less visible publicly, friends and fans noticed something. His focus never seemed to drift away from home. And that matters, because when news of his passing became public, it reframed everything people thought they knew. According to his wife's public statement, he passed peacefully after facing his illness with courage, faith, and grace. There were no dramatic details released, no speculation encouraged, just a request for privacy. But the response didn't stop. Instead of questions, people offered support. Instead of commentary, they donated. And as the total climbed, the organizers shared a short update. They didn't celebrate the number. They focused on the meaning behind it. They described the support as a light during an incredibly difficult time, a reminder that community is real, and that kindness still shows up when it matters most. That message struck a chord, because this wasn't about fans trying to feel close to a celebrity. It was about people responding to a family they believed deserved care, dignity, and space to heal. And at the center of that response was Kimberly Van Der Beek and their 6 children. 6 lives suddenly navigating a future without the person who had been their anchor. The fundraiser made one thing very clear. This support wasn't meant to replace anything. It was meant to protect something. Stability, routine, a sense of normalcy during a time when everything else felt uncertain. And perhaps that's why the reaction felt so different from typical celebrity fundraising stories. There was no spectacle, no urgency-driven messaging, no emotional manipulation, just quiet generosity, multiplied thousands of times. But there's another layer to this story that many people missed, because while donations were pouring in, the family made a specific request. They asked for privacy, not silence, not distance, just space. Space to mourn, space to be together, space to process a loss that no public support can truly soften. And interestingly, most people respected that, which raises a deeper question. Why did this moment resonate so strongly without crossing into noise or controversy? And what does it reveal about how people connect, not to fame, but to values? That answer begins earlier than most headlines suggest. Long before the fundraiser existed, there was a pattern in how James spoke about success. When asked about career milestones, awards, or recognition, he often redirected the conversation, not away from gratitude, but away from himself. In multiple interviews over the years, he made one thing clear. Being a father wasn't something he balanced alongside his work. It was the lens through which everything else was measured. He once explained that parenthood doesn't just add responsibility, it rewires your priorities. Joy stops individual. Achievement stops being singular. Life becomes shared. That mindset shaped how people perceived him, especially in later years. As public appearances became less frequent, there was no sense of disappearance, only a sense of intention. Fans didn't feel abandoned. They felt informed, because whenever he did speak, he spoke about home, about learning patience, about being present, about understanding that protecting your family sometimes means stepping back from the spotlight. So when news broke that he had been dealing with serious illness privately for years, the reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition. Recognition that the quiet choices people had noticed suddenly made sense. And then came the moment that many now view as symbolic. Months before his passing, a reunion event was held for the cast of Dawson's Creek, an event many fans had waited years to see. James wasn't able to attend in person. At the time, it was simply explained as an absence due to health reasons. No drama, no speculation. But something unexpected happened. His wife and children attended instead. And according to publicly shared accounts, when they took their seats, the audience stood up. Not for nostalgia, not for applause driven by recognition, but for them. Later, James spoke about watching that moment remotely. He described seeing all the love that would have been directed at him flow instead toward his family. He called it one of the most beautiful things he had ever witnessed. That detail matters, because it reframes the fundraiser not as a reaction, but as a continuation of how fans had already been responding, by shifting the focus away from him and toward the people he loved most. So when the GoFundMe appeared, the response felt instinctive, not performative, not rushed. People weren't donating because he was gone. They were donating because they understood what he valued while he was here, and the organizers seemed deeply aware of that responsibility. In their update, they avoided celebratory language. They didn't frame the donations as a victory. Instead, they emphasized gratitude and boundaries. They reminded the public that while support was deeply appreciated, the family needed time. Time without commentary, time without speculation, time without constant attention. That balance, openness paired with restraint, is rare. And it may explain why this story resonated so strongly without becoming overwhelming. There was no call for outrage, no framing of injustice, no pressure to do something, just an opportunity to help quietly. And many people took it. But there's an even bigger question underneath all of this. Why did this moment feel so different from other high-profile fundraisers? Why did it inspire generosity instead of debate? The answer might lie in something we don't talk about often enough. Visibility versus connection. James was visible for decades, but connection was something he built deliberately. Through consistency, humility, and clarity about what mattered to him. And in the end, that connection didn't center on his career. It centered on trust. Trust that support would be used responsibly. Trust that privacy would be respected. Trust that kindness would be met with gratitude, not expectation. That trust transformed a fundraiser into something else entirely, a statement, not about loss, but about community. And yet, even as the numbers climbed, the organizers were careful to say something important. This support doesn't erase grief. It doesn't replace a presence. It doesn't solve the pain of absence. What it does is create breathing room, room to grieve without immediate pressure, room to care for children without added instability, room to move forward slowly. And perhaps that's the most meaningful part of this story. Not the amount raised, but the way it was given. When stories like this circulate online, they often burn fast and fade just as quickly. A headline, a number, a brief emotional reaction. But this one lingered, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt grounded. It quietly challenged an assumption many people carry about public figures, that legacy is built primarily through visibility. In reality, what this moment revealed is something far more durable. Legacy is built through alignment between what someone says matters and how they actually live. between public image and private priorities. Over time, people noticed that James consistently centered his family, not as a talking point, but as a guiding principle. That consistency created something rare: credibility. So when support was requested, there was no skepticism, no questioning of intent, no debate about motives. There was trust, and trust changes how people respond. It turns attention into action. It turns sympathy into support. It turns a fundraiser into a shared responsibility. But perhaps the most important takeaway isn't about James at all. It's about what this response says about audiences today. Despite algorithms favoring outrage, despite constant noise, people still recognize sincerity when they see it. They still respond to restraint. They still value dignity over drama. And when given the opportunity to help without being manipulated, many choose to do so, quietly, generously, respectfully. The organizer's final message didn't ask for more donations. It didn't push updates. It didn't attempt to keep the story alive. Instead, it asked for something simpler: thoughts, prayers, privacy. And that request may be the most powerful detail of all, because it reframes support not as a transaction, but as a shared human moment, one that doesn't require constant attention to remain meaningful. This isn't the end of the story. It's a pause that invites reflection on how we show up for people, especially when the spotlight turns away. And it raises a question worth exploring further. In a world that often measures impact by volume, what does it mean when the quiet moments speak the loudest? That's where the next chapter begins. Because this wasn't just about generosity in a moment of loss. It was about the kind of connection that lasts long after the headlines stop.